Welcome. Thanks for joining today's Hacking HR 2020 Summit, the dawn of the decade of disruption. I hope you've been able to attend a few of the earlier sessions. If you missed the keynote by Jason Overbrook or the panels discussing how jobs are changing and disruptive technologies, these will be available on demand soon. I'm Heidi Glickman, and I have the distinct pleasure of moderating this fireside chat focused on digital transformation. For several years now, it seems like I've seen references all over the place for digital transformation, just about everywhere. This morning I did a quick Google search, and in less than a second, Google estimated that there were no less than about 257 million results. So quite a lot of points of view and discussion on digital transformation. So what exactly is digital transformation? Every consulting firm seems to have a slightly different definition, but at its core, digital transformation is a strategic process of determining how to best leverage technology, processes, and people differently in light of all of this new technology in order to achieve business outcomes. And then it's the process of working through all of the change management to get those changes in place. What we'd like to accomplish today is to broaden your awareness on key trends and take a deeper dive into a few topics that will help you as HR practitioners navigate these changes for your organization. We're really fortunate to have some incredible panelists with us today, and I'd like to introduce them. So Shannon Gatos is a Fortune 50 talent strategist. She's also the writer and founder of the 2050 Project. Shannon has led talent acquisition technology operations within General Motors and Ally Financial, and currently leads talent technology capability for the Boeing Company. As a self-proclaimed futurist, Shannon writes and speaks on the future of work, aging, and caregiving. And in her spare time, she also squeezes in quite a bit of travel. She's lived abroad, but has visited more than 65 countries to date. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you.
Shweta Srivastava is a future of work strategist. Shweta is passionate about how learning and development can best support digital transformation strategies. Shweta has held key HR roles at Cigna, Aditya Birla, and Tata Motors, and currently works for Microsoft, where she's focused on 21st century employability. Shweta's completed 2 master's degrees, one's focused on economics and one focused on business administration. Welcome, Shweta.
Thanks, Heidi.
Our third panelist today is Ben Eubanks. Ben is the principal research analyst for Lighthouse Research and Advisory, a human capital research firm. Ben is the author of Artificial Intelligence for HR, which is the first research look on how AI will influence hiring, training, and employee engagement. Ben is also the host of We're Only Human podcast. And when he's not speaking or writing, he tends to run a variety of outlandish races just for fun. Welcome, Ben. What was your last race?
My last race was last weekend. 3.5 miles. Was in Illinois for a fun family trip and decided to go and run a race and actually won. So that was all kinds of fun.
Oh, fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. So the way we're going to spend our time today is we're going to get some input from the panelists on some general trends that we're seeing. And then we're going to take a deeper dive into a few topics. I'll be monitoring the feed on LinkedIn, so I would ask all of our audience members to ask your questions along the way. And after, as we get to the end of the session, I'll pick a few of those questions to ask our panelists. So thank you everyone for being here. Shweta, let's begin with you. What are some of the most compelling trends that you see driving digital transformation today?
Well, I think there are so many, but for me, there are 3 most powerful drivers. The first one is the customer itself, right? Like, it's interesting when you think about digital transformation, it feels like the companies are driving the digital transformation, but one of the strongest and most powerful driving force is the customer expectations, right? Propelling companies to think about digital first. So today you got mobile devices, you got apps, you got machine learning, and which is enabling customers to get what they want and when they want, right? So think about our purchase patterns. We want to shop online. We want to see recommendations based on our past purchases and preferences. We want to be able to pay through a phone. We're increasingly getting influenced by social media. we want to access customer service 24/7, right? So all of that is really forcing companies to think about digital first strategy. And the other interesting thing that's happening alongside is a ton of customer private data that's getting generated, right? And there are regulations to deal with data privacy. And that's another reason why companies really got to think about their digital strategy and data protection to build that loyalty and trust with customers. So that's one. And then the second is about internal efficiencies and empowering your employees by giving them access to information and collaboration tools. So companies are increasingly thinking about investing in enhancing systems like their CRM, ERP, business intelligence software, and sort of integrating them to allow for a free flow of information, breaking down of silos to make better decisions and giving that empowerment to the employees. And then also internal collaboration platforms. Like, for example, I have worked remote for 6 years, and that's happened only because of technology, right? So if you work with Skype for Business, we have Microsoft Teams, there's Slack, all of these tools really allow for that collaboration. And the third, which I think is super interesting, is just the tsunami of data, right? There's just so much data. And especially as we see the growth of IoT devices, so Internet of Things. And so increasingly companies' transformation will depend on their ability to work with this data, right? To be able to collect this data, process this data, make sense of this data in a way that they can advance their business outcomes is gonna be like a key competency. As an example, I was just reading this report that said by 2025, we'll have over 40 billion connected IoT devices, which will produce over 79 zettabytes of data. So think about the complexity, which will require advanced machine learning and AI capabilities. So all of that, I think, is really transforming the world around us and the need to think digital. But I think the important thing is that it has to be grounded in business transformation and staying relevant, and digital transformation being a big component of it and not the only component.
Great. Thank you, Shweta. Great observations. Shannon.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Shweta has stated here. I know she is the resident expert on digital transformation. From my perspective, so my specialty is within the talent acquisition space, and that extends, that encompasses talent acquisition, executive recruiting, people analytics, workforce planning, all of those areas. And so when I think of digital transformation for the large companies that I have worked for or currently working with, I think it's really about the candidate experience and what does that candidate as our customer want. And I think it's very important that we build with the customer in mind, that we build an application process and an interview process and a soup to nuts process that can be enjoyable for a candidate and easy. So, mobile first, developing a mobile first approach to everything, ensuring that technology is available, very easily. You're not having to go to a computer and log in somewhere to get to our systems, and just making those candidates as customers feel that they are supported and that they really have a good experience all the way through. So and also with the GDPR and all of the kind of enhanced data privacy requirements, it is very important to think with that digital first mindset.
Great, thanks, Shannon. That whole consumer grade experience is incredibly important. Ben, what would you add?
So I'll bounce off of some of the things that Shweta said. One of them, she mentioned AI and lots of data. One of the stories that popped in my head when she said that was I recently heard a story of a healthcare company had their call center for handling all the billing and all the other fun things that we have to do on the administrative side. And they actually started putting Alexas in every single one of the cubes where these workers are or haven't taken these calls. And the reason was they're taking all these conversations, they're analyzing all the words they're using so they can improve their training, they can improve the workflows that they're using to get to better call resolutions. But overall, it's about creating that better customer experience, right? So tying some of the things we've heard together in the conversation today around the customer experience, around more data, around these IoT devices, everything else, trying to weave a picture that shows how those things are going to come together and create a different sort of landscape for work, where it's not just I can go and search something online, but I have this tool here sitting next to me that's helping me get my job done every day. That's an interesting piece of it. And the other facet that I focus a lot on, both in the research and just because I'm generally curious about it and I love hearing stories about it, is the skills piece of this, right? One of the very first things Shweta said was that the people side of the business is another part of this. And so we've done a lot of research looking at what the skills are. And what's interesting is we always think that, hey, I'm not using a computer that's 10 years old, 15 years old. Like the hardware is obsolete. But skills can become obsolete too. If we're focusing on the old ones, we're not focusing on these new reskilling initiatives, things like that. We've seen a lot of stories in the last few years of huge companies putting big investments in that, right? Walmart did it a few years ago. Amazon just made their announcement. GE and some others have done things in that vein. And so one of the things I'm really focused on when talking about digital transformation is making sure we're thinking about the people side of it, because we can buy some shiny toys, but if we don't have the people to operate them, we don't have people that are in place to understand how they connect in this crazy world that we're living in, right? Fast-paced, everything else, then we're not going to get the full effect, the full value, the full ROI out of that time and effort and resources we're investing there. So big picture, that's kind of what I'm focusing on.
Terrific. Great. Yeah. The skills piece is incredibly important. And I think it's probably one of the examples, and maybe one of you will take a deeper dive in that area later around, I think a lot of companies are feeling challenged by it. So, which is a great segue to a question about skilling. Like, where are you seeing, what are companies grappling? What are the challenges they're faced with today? As you kind of work with different folks, what trends are you seeing there? Ben?
Sure. So we actually did a study earlier this year because we kept hearing from companies that this was a concern for them. They were worried about it. They were being disrupted by it. And so we did a study to understand how many employers felt that way. And what we found is that 81% of companies agreed that the pace, the disruption, everything else is causing us to rethink how we're skilling our employees and think about reskilling in a different kind of way. So it's hard to get 8 out of 10 people to agree on anything. So that was interesting in itself. We also dug deeper and asked them about the specific skills that mattered the most. And what's interesting is there's lots of anecdotal evidence out there that says, soft skills matter, things like that. And one of the quotes I love and use when I'm presenting is the CEO of LinkedIn, one of the world's foremost technology companies, they do a lot of research and focus on technology. He said, technical skills are great, but soft skills are what really matter long term. And when we asked employers what was the number one skill someone needs to be successful long term, the thing that came out wasn't something about computers. It was communication skills. They said, we've got to be able to interact with and work with each other. Yes, these other things do matter. But I said earlier, they have a shelf life. They have a certain finite amount of time before that they pass away and aren't as important anymore. And you have to change that entirely again. But if someone has that fundamental underlying soft skill piece, they can understand the change management. They can get through the disruption. They can get through all these hurdles that are facing them and be prepared for what's next. So it's really a big part. The skilling piece for me, again, is a big part of the conversation. I love technology, right? I wrote a book about it because I love it, but at the same time, the people side of the equation is really, really important here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I totally agree with Ben, and just kind of building off of what he said, I think it's also the leadership skills, which is when I was looking at what are the top challenges, this was so consistent. The lack of expertise to lead digital transformation, because we need very different kind of leadership. And I was reading about that in one of the research from Deloitte. It was just super interesting, the kind of leaders we need today to lead this kind of transformation. Of course, they need to be digital savvy and have an appreciation for the possibilities for technology. But at the same time, they also got to be people who can take risks, right? People who can foster that culture of growth mindset and continuous learning. Because as Ben was talking about it, the skills are constantly evolving. And if there is not that culture of constantly looking at how to upgrade your skills, then it could get really challenging. And so how do you foster that and work with large teams and partner with the broader ecosystem, and really, be able to work with the different business parts of the business and departments. So all of those skills are so important. And the other thing that I would say is change management. And I think it's not getting spoken about enough. This is a fairly large change, and you see a lot of resistance coming from the organization because of not having clarity about it, and the uncertainty involved with it, and the prospects of kind of losing jobs and all those things. So it's a massive change management effort that I think companies need to think about, and a lot of companies are thinking about, but it's really, really critical.
Thanks, Shweta. Couldn't agree more. How about you, Shannon? Are you seeing some of those similar trends in organizations, or anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I would definitely echo the need for strong communication skills in the workforce of the future. Appetite for risk, definitely agree with that as well. And I would add on, I think the theme of what we're saying is those soft skills. We have flexibility, we need adaptability, we need that, as Shweta mentioned, that continuous learning, that appetite to keep improving upon your current knowledge, and branching out into different areas, because that's really what we'll be seeing in the future. I've seen a statistic that students entering the workforce today, 65% of them will enter jobs that don't exist yet. I've seen stats around people will have 17 jobs within their lifetime, and that could be on the low end if you think about how frequently people are job hopping today. And so it's very important that we're building a different kind of culture within talent and learning. And something, we need to think about the technology that's underlying that. So something that I'm interested in is looking at internal mobility, and looking at technology that says, not you can go from a financial analyst 1 to a financial analyst 2 or a 3, but here are the skills that you have. Here are some of your capabilities, based on a survey that they took or something like that. And here are the things that you need to get you to, this job over here in communications, or this job over here in marketing, or this job as a data scientist. So really showing people how they can grow and what they need to do to get there, as opposed to these traditional, very rote kind of stepping stones to within the same function.
Great, thank you. Actually, Shweta, I think you've done a little bit of research in this space, and there may be a couple of organizations that you've seen that are doing a pretty good job of making exactly these kinds of investments. Could you elaborate on a few of those examples?
Yeah, sure. So, and we spoke about that, right, in the last conversation. I think one of the companies that I want to talk about is AT&T, because they made some, massive changes to their business model over the last decade. And so when they did the research on, skill mapping, they realized that just about half of their almost like 250,000 employees had the STEM skills that they needed to deliver on their strategy. And in addition to that, about 100,000 employees were almost on the verge of seeing skills getting obsolete and running the risk of losing their jobs over the next decade. And so, they had to decide between hiring all these new people for these skills and paying through their nose, or reskilling or upskilling their existing set of employees. And so talent shortage is a whole different conversation, right? And so kind of numbers that they're looking at, even if they decided to pay for it and look for people outside, they would not have found the numbers that they were looking for. And so, the choice was kind of obvious, and they felt like, the people already have majority of the skills they need. So why not invest in reskilling and upskilling? So they launched this massive $1 billion web-based initiative called Future Ready, to upskill their employees. So it was largely web-based. So they tied up with Coursera, Udacity, universities across the country to create these to create and offer these programs. They also had a career center through which people could look at these career paths and figure out the way to upskill them. But very interestingly, they also had something called career intelligence, which basically showed to the employees which jobs are available, what's the salary range, how could I upskill in those to fill those jobs, and most importantly, which jobs are going to grow or shrink in the next few years. So I think that is something I feel is so important, which gets missed out because there is this, there are these group of people who are working on the strategy. And then we're talking about reskilling and upskilling this large group of employees. And there is not a lot of communication for employees to really know where to invest their time. Like even if you have tuition reimbursement or whatever that you offer to them, how are they expected to know what are your big bets, which jobs are going to be critical for the company. So as they're thinking about investing their time and resources, so which I thought was really cool. And so when this project is successful, they're expecting by 2020 to reskill about 100,000 employees on cutting edge skills that they need for the business today. And according to the company, these employees are twice as likely to get selected for these roles and 4 times as more likely to make a career advancement. So I thought that was such a fabulous example of large-scale, massive upskilling initiative by really investing in their people.
Can I chime in on that? There's a interesting story I heard recently. IBM was facing the same kind of challenges, right? Every really large company has those same things. They get to a point because they are so large where they realize, hey, wait a minute, all these people we've been hiring for years and years and years, their skills maybe don't fit the new direction we need to go. And so they actually, at an executive level, listed out, sat down, worked through a list of the specific skills they needed as an organization to be successful going in the future. And when they had their leadership meetings every single week, they were looking at that list through the organization. They could see granularly through each department, which of their teams, which of their functions had those skills. And there was pressure there in a positive way, right, on each leader to make sure that those were being fed down through the organization, through every single layer of leadership, so that every employee knew what was important. What skills should I be developing, right? If I show up at the training LMS today and I'm not sure what to take, I should see these things prioritized because I know my leader's been telling me you need to get X, Y, and Z skills and you don't have those yet. So they all got them on the same page and the same kind of thing, right? Where everybody gets some clarity there. I think a lot of companies, though, are in a boat a little bit more like another company I recently spoke with. They're a financial services firm. They have 40,000 employees. And we were working through, they're building digital teams, right? They're working through a digital transformation. And the person in charge of creating the digital team said, my problem is I don't know what skills everybody has. And I said, okay, well, if you had to put a number on it, what % of your workforce would you say you have a really clear picture of their skills, their capabilities, so you can transition into these teams, right? Because Shannon talked about internal ability, transferring people around in the business. Let's find them another role that's more aligned with the direction of the business, what they want to do. And he said, maybe 10% of the people. So I said, you have 36,000 employees walking around. You have no idea beyond their job title what they can do. So a lot of companies, I think, are in that spot where they might want to make a change, but they're not sure yet what their skills are to the degree that AT&T did, right? Or IBM did, or some of these other companies. So the first thing you got to do is get really clear on what the skills are in a business so you can know where to tap into them, what you have available. Because before you go out and hire, 10 people, 50 people, 100 people, whatever else, you might have those people already available, ready to make that transition, and they're interested and willing. You just don't know they're there. So get really clear on the skills you have inside the business.
Yeah, and it's nice to see that a lot of the talent technology is evolving today, where folks can share information on their skill sets and really create that internal labor market pool with skills that you might be surprised that are in there.
Yep. In fact, Heidi, I read about a really interesting example, just building off on what Ben said, if I could just share that real quick. Henkel, so they are really focused on, basically assessing the skills, the existing skills of the company. And they do some really cool things like, they have this online assessment. They have an app through which you can take this online assessment. And on basically anchored on 2 things. One is what they call digitally base fit, which is, basic level of digital literacy or how digital savvy their employees are. and then there is this expert fit. So for the base fit, they just have a playful assessment that anybody can take, and that gives them some sense of where people are with respect to basic digital skills, and they can then create trainings and resources and recommend through their personalized learning platform. And then the other thing is that they've created this digital capability framework for their job families like HR, marketing, sales, supply chain, and then they have created this this ideal or a reference point that they need, the kind of capability that they need for that job family and the roles within that job family. And then the people within that team, they take that expert fit assessment, and that's the way they kind of identify what are the gaps, and then they kind of based on that, through their personalized learning platform, they push out or recommend resources, trainings, or whatever to bridge those gaps. So I just thought that was a very interesting and energizing way of thinking about it.
I would agree. I was talking to Marina Spandriel from Aon the other day, and he was talking about some work that they had done for Vodafone that was very similar, and it enabled not just internal folks, but external to actually go out and take an assessment and understand how their skill sets align to the roles of the future. So lots of innovation taking place there. Excited to see it. Shannon, kind of as we kind of think about, we spent some time in the skills. You're focused really on thinking about that skill set perspective from an external view as you look outside of their organization. Are there things that relate to skills or other specific topics that you'd say are misconceptions that you see pretty widely?
Misconceptions on digital transformation?
Yeah, generally on digital transformation, and either what skills are needed, or is there a lack of awareness around?
I will speak. So I'd like to speak from the perspective again of the HR community, and specifically within talent functions. I think there's a misconception about what the role of an HR technology person is these days. It seems there's a lot of focus around like HR analyst type of roles, or project management, or very kind of specific roles that fit within the larger digital transformation landscape. But what I'm not really seeing is put a focus, an emphasis within HR organizations to find people that can see the big picture and what the full scope of HR, what everybody needs to do to pull all of this together into a comprehensive technology strategy that works. And this is going to be a multi-year strategy. So I think that, another kind of, I think a misconception that I'm seeing is like, occasionally, well, not occasionally, I frequently, in my discussions with people at other companies as well, see a kind of, Workday or a similar platform is kind of God, you know what I mean? Like we're going to move to this platform, it's going to solve all of our problems. And I think what's getting left out of those conversations as companies are embarking on these like multi-year journeys to get to that final state is, what about all the other pieces? And what kind of skills do we need within HR and talent and technology to get us to like 2025, for example? Where are we trying to go? Where's the organization trying to go? How is the technology going to get us there? And how do we all work together to get there, instead of having like talent acquisition is working on this and learning is working on something else, and comp and benefits is kind of not, or total rewards, if you will, is not all tied in together. And on the flip side of that, or underlying everything really, is the metrics. So are we building sustainable reporting platforms and teams that can pull all this together and really help us assess success or failure, if you will? So I guess misconceptions, that I see really come down to a more siloed approach to technology and looking for really specific people to fill really specific skills, when we need almost, one thing I frequently say is, we need those big picture strategic thinkers that can pull everything together and then help, help people get out of the weeds really, in that operational setting.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think it's fascinating that oftentimes people, and there's some comments going on the LinkedIn feed right now, that oftentimes people think that technology or some particular system is going to change everything. But I really appreciate your points on, it's not just technology, it's the whole people side of change, and really thinking through what this business strategy is and how the technology can enable you to shift your processes and focus on where people can have the biggest impact.
Yeah, and I think there's an opportunity for a shift toward linking not only HR with IT, which a lot of companies have done, which is great, but to your point, linking with business strategy, with what is the global strategy team working on? What trends are they seeing? How can we link together with them? How do we link with marketing and supply chain? How do we use supply chain tactics in our HR processes? There's a lot of opportunity for synergies, I think. So it's my hope that over time, over the next several years, as we're undergoing all of this digital transformation and change, that HR will evolve, to really be that more strategic partner with support from other areas.
Great point, Shannon. Shweta, are you seeing any other misconceptions around digital transformation?
Well, the immediate one is that it leads to loss of jobs, right? That's the first thing that you hear, which creates that resistance and all that. Which I think it's not just about loss of jobs, because through embracing technology, we could see loss of some job duties, and we heard that in one of the panel discussions earlier today too. Like things like job task analysis, and to really look at where do you want to invest, right, to make your processes more efficient. But then it also frees up employees to pursue things that are more value adding, which can actually lead to sustainable employment for future, which can lead to gains in your compensation, wages, whatever. So there is a lot to be gained there, but I think it needs a solid talent strategy related to thinking about, which jobs are getting impacted, to what extent, and is there an opportunity to upskill and reskill employees. And the only other thing, and the other big thing I would say is, this, you feel that it's mostly related to software companies or IT departments, which is not necessarily true, because if you look at any sector, any industry, they're embracing technology. I mean, healthcare, precision medicine, automobile, right? Already talking about autonomous self-driven cars, and retail, big disruption happening. So all of that it's not really about IT or software companies, but like as Shannon said, bigger transformation. What are we after? What is our big strategy for customers, for employees, for building more efficiencies? And how do these different pieces, like our customer strategy, talent strategy, optimization strategy, sales, marketing, all of that comes together? And where do you want to invest then, right? Keeping in mind all of these different components.
Great point. Ben, given all the research that you've been conducting, are you seeing similar themes emerge, or are there other things that you're running into that appear to be misconceptions?
I was actually going to take it back to even more basic level, right? Just the less a misconception than a broad lack of understanding of what digital transformation is. I love that you started out the conversation today, not by diving into the topic and asking a bunch of questions, but by saying, let's level set a little bit. Here's the definition, right? To give it a little bit of a grounding there. And it's really easy, like Shannon was saying, to get in the weeds of just the work you're doing, right? We are delivering this product. We are doing this service. We are just making this thing happen because this is our job. And it's really easy to get bogged down in that and forget about the bigger picture, like we've heard about in the conversation here, right? If you walk with nothing else in this conversation, I'm hoping that we 3 or 4 here that can pull you into the bigger picture and help you think about that a little bit more strategically. Think about that when you're thinking about what's next for us. It's not what's next month, but what's next year, 5 years, 10 years. Let's think about the long game. Think about the bigger picture, because there's so much happening so quickly. We can't predict. Like, we hear all these these predictions right now about all these jobs going to be lost. Those are educated guesses by smart people, but they're just guesses. We don't know for sure, right? And every time different jobs are gone, new jobs are created we could not have predicted. In the book, I make the joke that before we had search engines, no one would have ever imagined there would be a person whose entire job is to create ways for search engines to find websites. But that's what search engine optimization people do. SEO experts do that all day long. That's their job. And so we can't predict all of the new jobs that are going to be created out of these things. So just think big picture, get yourself grounded in this, understand what it is and how it's going to affect your organization, because every company is a little different. Every culture is a little different. And you know best what your company is going to need to survive this and to thrive after the transformation has picked up and has gone on for some period of time. And I just encourage you to really educate yourself, look at some of the resources, get yourself some evidence, some data. I always like to say Ben's opinion is great, but it's much better when there's some data behind it, and look for some research to help you get through that for sure.
Terrific. There's a comment on the feed from Guillermo who made the observation. He said countries with the highest level of robotization have the lowest unemployment rates. And that's the first time I've seen that information, and it didn't say where it came from, but it doesn't sound all that surprising. The fear that gets created about people losing jobs, I think, is a little bit overhyped. And as long as companies are making the right sorts of investments in skilling the workforce or skilling their future workforce. So there was another question on here from Tori earlier. And the observation there was all about, it seems like a lot of private industry is doing a pretty good job of being forward thinking about technology and being willing to take risks. But his question was, how do we influence more traditional organizations like government organizations to be a little bit more open to using technology? Anybody want to weigh in on that one?
I think
if we go for it, Shweta.
No, go ahead.
I was going to make a joke. It was going to be completely unhelpful. So you run for it.
I was just saying, I think what always typically helps is exposing people to possibilities, right? And so whether it's government organization or your senior leadership that's not very digital savvy or change resistant, just exposing them to possibilities. And one of the examples that comes to my mind is Pfizer. I mean, it's not a government agency, but a government company. But what they did was they exposed their business executives to possibilities for technology by taking them through AI boot camps. And they took like about 1,000 employees through these boot camps, which was over 30,000 AI-fueled colleague hours, them getting together and experiencing it, and which clearly made them more confident and cognizant of the possibilities that AI posed for the company to get a better understanding of the patients, the diseases, drug discovery, time to market, and all of that, which led to adoption at different rates across the enterprise. But it happened in one department, and the other department kind of took off from there, learned and applied. And so that's sort of like a multiplier effect starting from there, which I thought was a really great way. Instead of if they just implemented something and said you had to do this, there would have been a lot more resistance, versus just taking them through something that exposes them to what could the possibilities be and what would be the advantages, and then identifying people who could be advocates and who were most passionate about that experience. So that was the first thing that came to my mind.
That's a great example.
I have a non-joking answer now. Okay, I had a moment to think through it and calm myself down. So, two things. Number one, there are still plenty of really smart, really forward-thinking leaders, both within HR and outside of it, in the government. They can't always do what they want to do. They don't always have that power. But I spoke to one of the top HR professionals at the FBI recently, actually, right? Everybody knows who they are. And they're probably not, they do a lot of really interesting and innovative things in their operational side, but on their HR side, he said, we're like everybody else. We're just trying to get it done. We're grinding away, very administrative. And at the same time, he's always trying to learn and understand about the latest information he can, so that when the opportunity comes, he can use that as a lever to try to engage the rest of the business, the rest of the leadership, right, in his role, and try to get them engaged in that and make that happen. But he said, if I just took the approach that well, I'm in government. Good luck. I will be innovative. I'll have to leave. So then nothing would ever happen. So he said, there have been times throughout my career where I've been able to push something strategically at the right moment, at the right time, not because I'm magic, but because I took my time in between those points and actually was educating myself, staying aware of the trends, staying on top of the technology, things like that. So that was one thing. The other is one of the other skills that we found in our research when we were doing is to understand what the skills are of the future, right? One of them was critical thinking. And so the way I always illustrate this is Gallup did a study a few years ago, and they asked college chief academic officers, how many of these students that are leaving your doors here, they got a diploma, how many of the students are ready to hit the ground running in their job? And they said 90%, 9 out of 10 of these kids are ready to roll, right? And when they asked the same question to business leaders, didn't quite match up. They asked business leaders the same question and they said 10%. 1 out of 10 of these people that come from college are ready to hit the ground running. Right? They have a lot of knowledge, but they have no critical thinking skills yet. They don't have a lot of awareness of how the world works, no practical applications, things like that. And I think that's part of this conversation too, is we have a lot of people that, whether it's in education or elsewhere, have a lot of knowledge, but not a lot of opportunity or a lot of ideas on how to implement those things. Sorry, my tongue got stuck there. Implement those things. And so I think that's part of it too, right? Not only do the people in the government, in those other kind of traditional or very risk-averse types of organizations, like Pfizer's is a great example of that, right? The companies like that are very risk-averse, but there are ways to engage them. It's just, if you're a leader in one of those organizations, don't lose hope, right? We're here for you. We'll give you a cheer session anytime you need it, right? Come out and read some of the research or tag one of us. Any one of us be willing to give you some insights, some pointers, some encouragement, because those companies can still be innovative, as we've heard from some of the examples that are here.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that carries true too for some of these companies. I was talking to somebody in an insurance company that had been around for over 100 years, and they have a reputation for being very traditional. But what they've purposely done is invested in all of these innovation projects. So the leadership and culture is there to do experimentation and to take risks. And they're doing a great job of telling the stories around the outcomes of what they're learning in those processes and figuring out how to adopt some of those to help them disrupt themselves before they get disrupted in the marketplace. So,
and another example that comes to my mind, Heidi, is I don't know a ton of details about this, but I had heard about P&G. They launched this employee exchange program with Google. So is there a way that, and I don't think this would really cost much. It's just about, exchanging employees to give you this opportunity to see from a different lens, right? And so that could be another great way to think about quick learning, getting a really different perspective, and coming back with like a complete new, fresh thinking and a really different way of engaging leaders by actually taking them from this environment, which may be more change resistant and traditional, to a very different environment, which is just so innovative and so path breaking, to really break that traditional thinking and just allow them to think so differently through these kind of engagements. So I thought that could be another interesting way of looking at how this could be done.
Great point, Shweta. So let's switch gears to a topic that we haven't spent a lot of time on yet. Shannon, I know you have a forthcoming book called The 2030 Papers: How Robots, Debt, and Aging Will Change the Way We Learn, Work, and Die. In your book, you talk a little bit about the impact of debt and aging on the future of work. Can you highlight a couple trends for this group?
Yeah, absolutely. So I find that when we talk about the future of work, and this is part of the reason I wrote the book, there is a lot of focus on things like digital transformation, AI, robots, all that kind of stuff. And while that's very important, I think there are a couple of topics that are not as frequently discussed that are going to have huge impacts on the future of work and the workforce. So I have 3 stats that I would like to share, and I have found these stats to really resonate with audiences in others talks that I've given. So they pertain to, as you mentioned, one is retirement and finances and debt, one is caregiving, and the third is learning. So the first stat is so MetLife just put out a 2019 study. It's a study that they do every year on full-time employees in the workforce and their plans for retirement. And what they published this year was pretty shocking, actually. So 52% of the 3,000 people that they surveyed are planning on not retiring due to financial reasons. So they're delaying retirement due to financial reasons. Now, the shocking part of this is that number, as early as 2015, so only 4 years ago, was only 37%. So in the last 4 years, we've essentially gone from 37% of people with full-time jobs reporting that they're postponing retirement for financial reasons up to 52%. And I think we can expect this number to continue. To continue to climb in this direction. One of the other stats that I talk about often is that 90% of Americans of retirement age have less than 100,000 saved for retirement. And this is with people with any kind of retirement account. So we're talking, people with 401ks or, 403s or anything else, IRAs. It doesn't even include people without those accounts. So this debt situation and this financial unpreparedness, if you will, for retirement is one reason pushing people to delay retirement. Now, there are many other reasons for this, which we don't have time to get into today. They might want to continue working, to be connected to people. They might like working. They may not want to retire. But that financial unpreparedness is really going to impact the next 10, 20 years, 30 years potentially. The second stat is around caregiving. So when you think about what your employees are going to need in the future of work, caregiving demand is projected to increase by 160% by 2050. This is largely due to the aging population and the needs that come with that. So while there will be a 13% increase in caregivers, so people that could potentially be the caregivers based on age and some other factors, there's going to be an 84% increase in people requiring the care. So there's a caregiver to care recipient ratio that is really going to be floundering. So when you think about impacts to the workforce, people may need more time off, they may need more remote work, they may need more flexible schedules, or even need to take medical leaves to care for aging parents, grandparents, etc. Some even while still taking care of children or college-age kids that still live with them. And in the presentations I've given, and this really resonates with people because, many people have come up to me after presentations and said, well, this will probably be me in 5 years or 10 years, or this already is me. And so what are organizations going to do, to really, to support that? And then the third one real quickly is around learning. And so we've touched a lot on learning and shifting skills and everything, but that one factor driving this trend is how quickly skills are advancing and evolving over time. But another one is, again, debt. Student debt levels are at an all-time high. We're above 1.5 trillion. And so people are, this statistic here is that traditional 4-year college enrollment is expected to decline potentially by up to 15% by 2025. Debt is one thing driving this, but again, the skills and, just the fact that people have other opportunities. They may be able to learn skills through nano degree programs or online programs or boot camps, and not necessarily have to put themselves in a ton of debt to go to college. So those are my 3 stats for today.
And lots of implications and lots of options, as we talked about a little bit earlier, for reskilling or upskilling. And somebody had commented in the feed a bit earlier as well about the gig economy, and there may be opportunities for folks to build a whole new set of skills around things that they just haven't done in the past as they continue to work much longer.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for sharing that. Let's take another deep dive. Ben, your book, Artificial Intelligence for HR, outlines the current technology landscape as well as the latest AI developments. So what do you see as the most significant development that HR professionals should be aware of?
One of the things that gets me after doing all the research and doing all the writing on the book is that a lot of the things that we do day to day, right? I'm thinking about my experience working in HR as an HR professional. The things that we do day to day, a lot of those things can be automated already today by some of the tools that are out there. And what's interesting is as I finished the book, I finished with that, and it was like, well, good luck. And so I went back and did some more research on this thing. I keep talking about this human skills of work, and did some more research because I wanted people to finish the book with some hope, right? That there's actually a future for us. And what was interesting is I found that these different skills are not just what we need in ourselves, we also need in our workforce. So one of the skills, I'll tell you a quick story to illustrate this, an example of this, how we can use AI and other tools to make work more human by creating better experiences for our people, for our candidates. So one of the core human skills for it is creativity. So a couple years ago, there was a competition between recruiters and an algorithm to see who could recruit better. And the way it worked, you downloaded 5,000 resumes, and there were 3 open jobs. You had to figure out of the 5,000 people, which ones were interviewed and hired. You got correct guesses for each one. Well, competition went on, and the humans won. Yes. A sourcer, Randy Bailey from Walmart, got 3 correct guesses out of 5,000 resumes. And a pair of people came in second, a couple correct, but not all correct. The algorithm came in third, and everyone else came in after that. When I interviewed Randy, he said it took him between 30 and 40 hours to get his estimates correct, which is a lot of time. It was a competition, not work, so he was having some fun with it and was willing to put in some extra effort. The algorithm took less than 5 seconds to get his answers down. And the answer there isn't, I want people to grasp that gravity of that, but also to understand that the answer wasn't, we should just go all human all the time, because Randy would have rather have had 30 hours back in his life to do other things. The algorithm was close, but not completely correct, right? So how can we find the right ways to mix the things they can do with the things we can do? Let it do the heavy lifting, and we'll come in with our expertise, our creativity, our curiosity, the core things that make us human, to find the right answers there, so that we don't have to do all of the kind of robotic parts of the work anyway. Like Shweta said earlier, just because things are automating doesn't mean that jobs are going away. And one of you said a little bit ago that the commenter said more automation, right? Economies of more automation have lower unemployment rates. And I think that's one of the reasons why, because we find more strategic, more valuable things to do. And that kind of ties it back to the rest of the conversation today. If we're getting rid of some of those mundane robotic tasks that none of us love doing anyway, I'm sure Shannon doesn't want to sit there and screen 150 resumes by hand, right? She'd punch herself in the face. I don't want to answer that employee's self-service request for the 10th time this week on how to change their 401k deferral, right? If we can automate those things and focus on the more valuable parts of that job, that's where the real value is in AI.
Awesome. So Ben, there's a question from Jivan in the feed who is inquiring about the bias that are in the algorithms. Can you elaborate on that? I know innately algorithms are designed in a certain way, and there may be lots of bias. There may not. There's different kinds of bias embedded in there. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So there's a couple different kinds of bias, like you said, and we can talk for an hour on this one. So I'll try to keep it as short as I can. There are types of algorithms that are developed with bias put into it, so that when we see the outputs, they are biased already because of how it was developed, right? There are ways to combat that by having more diverse teams on the development side. IBM, I did a podcast with IBM's distinguished chief engineer scientist. I can't remember her title. It was this long, but I did an interview with her to talk about how they've approached that, try to make really diverse teams developing the software so that you get around some of the bias issues. One of the other things, though, is that through the usage of the algorithm, we can bias it as well. Professor LaTanya Sweeney at Harvard did an experiment a couple years ago because she searched her name, and the result that popped up said, "Would you like to see LaTanya Sweeney's arrest record?" And she freaked out, right? And she found out that when the algorithm was created, that little ad she clicked on was balanced. Would you like to see her high school transcripts? Would you like to see her arrest record? But over time, based on the things the users were clicking on, more users clicked on that. And so it drove that up in the rankings, and you saw it more often. And so it's a reminder that not only can the algorithms be biased, we can also bias them with how we're using them, the sort of inputs we're giving them. I have a 2-year-old and lots of older kids, but a 2-year-old, and if I teach her the wrong things, she'll do the wrong things. And algorithms are no smarter than that at this current stage. They don't know how to self-check themselves. And so we need to be very careful of the kinds of decisions that they're making, how we're letting them recommend things for us, because we need to use our our red flag detector we have as HR leaders to make sure that if we're talking to a vendor about a tool or something like that, the things it's using as signals to recommend aren't things that would cause us harm as a business, that would upset us, that we would realize that's not the right thing. Because it never ceases to amaze me. A lot of startup companies that are coming in this space, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they've never recruited before, they've never worked in HR, and so they're using things like someone's GPA or someone's college they went to or their zip code to recommend a candidate, and all those things can be biased in what they're recommending.
Yeah, great points. So my doctorate's in industrial and organizational psychology, and we spent significant amount of time in statistics and research methodology to really understand how you design things effectively to derive the right outcomes. So, obviously that is not a topic for a 1 hour session, but there's a lot more to it. So thanks for sharing some of that.
Absolutely.
I also saw in the feed that Peter had made a recommendation for some of the things that Shannon talked about. He had suggested there's a book out there called The 100-Year Life that folks might want to look at. In addition to that, I wanted to ask the panelists as we get close to wrapping up, any particular recommendations that you have for or advice for our audience today on either a resource or something that they can do specifically to help their organizations navigate their digital transformation process?
I'll jump in just by piggybacking off of the recommendation. I haven't read that one and I'm looking for something new, so I just wrote it down. So thank you for that. From an overall future of work, technology, AI, robot standpoint, I recommend The Fourth Industrial Revolution by Klaus Schwab. He's the founder and chairman of the World Economic Forum. I think it's a fantastic book. It really just highlights many of the trends we've been talking about today and more, and I think it's in a really digestible format. So I recommend that for anybody that's ever asked me kind of where do I even start to understand about these topics. That's what I would recommend.
Great, thank you, Shannon.
Mm-hmm.
Shweta?
So I would say from some processes perspective that can really give you a lot of insights, because it's really hard to start if we don't have the right insights. So customer insights, employee insights, some processes like customer journey mapping, employee journey mapping to understand how their preferences are evolving, what are the pain points before you pick technology or any other solution is really important. I have used both, and it's been really helpful in sort of mapping the entire journey and seeing what are the touch points and how you can think about technology addressing some of those. And then design thinking is another process that I personally love and leverage a lot, especially when I'm working on a project that I don't already have a solution in mind. And so really bringing in the customer's voice and being able to test a variety of different prototypes early. I think those are the three processes I've always gone back to generate insights and think about options. So yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Great, thanks, Shweta. And Ben?
In terms of resources, something that could help you around some of the conversations we've had today, we publish a lot of research that's totally free for practitioners, so you can grab it at Lighthouse Research and Advisory. And some of the things we talked about, like the skills piece, what are the future skills of HR more and talent more broadly? What are some of the things that AI can do around the HR practices and processes to help us to make work more human? Lots of data out there, including some research on the cost of reskilling versus hiring someone externally from the markets. You can figure out when that makes sense. So lots of interesting data out there. And again, I echo what I said earlier. Everything Shweta said, everything Shannon said, lots of good recommendations here. Be data-driven, be evidence-based in your approach when you're trying to recommend this and drive this internally, because that's going to help you be more successful long-term than if you're just trying to push this with your own steam, your own willpower. Use some data. Great
recommendation, Ben. Thank you. So I'd like to thank our panel today. Really fantastic discussion on a really meaty topic. So thanks for joining us and sharing your perspectives and your experiences with this group. I'd like to encourage the audience to go out and check out Enrique's feed if you missed any of the earlier sessions today. And if you have time tomorrow, please be sure to join us on some of the sessions in day 2. Lots more interesting dialogue and discussion. So thank you, everybody.